I'm Heather Mitchell, 29 years old, and sitting in this leather chair at Wilson and Associates law firm, I feel like I can't breathe. 2 weeks ago, my parents died in a car accident on their way home from dinner. Yesterday, we buried them. Today, I learned they left their entire estate to my brother Derek. The house I grew up in, the family business, all their investments, everything went to him. Nothing for me. Not a single penny. Before I tell you how my perfect family fell apart right before my eyes, take a second to let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to hear how I fought back when I discovered the painful truth behind my parents' decision. Growing up in our colonial-style home in Greenwich, Connecticut, I never imagined I'd one day be fighting my own brother for what I believed was rightfully mine. We were the picture-perfect family in our upper-middle-class neighborhood. Dad drove a Mercedes, Mom hosted garden parties, and Derek and I attended private school. From the outside, we had it all. My father, Michael Mitchell, built Mitchell Properties from scratch. A self-made man who started with one small apartment building and grew it into a respectable real estate development firm with properties across 3 states. He was my hero. Unlike many of my friends' dads who were absent workaholics, my father always made time for me. Every Sunday morning, rain or shine, we'd go fishing at the small lake just outside of town. He taught me how to bait my own hook, how to wait patiently for the fish to bite, and most importantly, how to be resilient when things didn't go as planned. Heather, sweetheart, he'd say, in business and in life, you've got to be patient and persistent. The big catches don't come easy. He taught me basic carpentry in his workshop, showing me how to use tools that Derek had no interest in. We'd spend hours building birdhouses, repairing furniture, and talking about everything from school to politics. He never treated me differently because I was a girl, and he instilled in me the belief that I could do anything I set my mind to. My mother, Eleanor, was more complicated. A former ballet dancer who gave up her career when she married my father, she channeled her perfectionism into raising us. She had exacting standards for everything from our table manners to our academic achievements. While she loved us deeply, her approval was harder to earn than Dad's. Posture, Heather, she'd remind me constantly. First impressions matter more than you think. She was particularly invested in Derek's future. My brother was groomed from an early age to follow in Dad's footsteps. 2 years older than me, Derek was the spitting image of our father, tall, broad-shouldered, with the same charismatic smile and confident demeanor. He excelled at everything he tried, from debate team to varsity lacrosse. When he graduated high school and headed to Yale for undergraduate studies before law school, just like Dad had done, our parents couldn't have been prouder. I, on the other hand, took a different path. While I did well academically, I was drawn to the arts. I had an eye for design and color that even my mother, with all her criticism, acknowledged was exceptional. I studied interior design at Parsons School of Design in New York City, much to my parents' dismay. They had hoped I'd pursue business or law, something more practical. Creative careers are hobbies, not professions, my mother would say. How will you support yourself? Dad was more supportive, at least initially. He'd show interest in my projects, asking questions about my design choices and occasionally incorporating my ideas into his development properties. But as time went on and I remained committed to my creative path, I could sense his disappointment. Family gatherings became increasingly tense as I established my own interior design business in Manhattan. While Derek was made junior partner at Dad's firm, I struggled to build my client base in the competitive New York market. Holiday dinners often devolved into subtle digs about the financial instability of my chosen career. "How's that little decorating business going?" Mom would ask, as if I was arranging throw pillows instead of managing complete home renovations for wealthy clients. Derek, to his credit, occasionally defended me. "Leave her alone, Mom. Heather's doing what she loves." But even his defenses felt condescending, like he was protecting his little sister from harsh realities she couldn't understand. Behind the supportive facade, there was always an air of superiority, as if he'd made the right choice while I was still playing pretend. Despite the tension, I never doubted that my parents loved me. Dad continued our fishing tradition whenever I visited, though our conversations became more guarded. Mom still called every Sunday to check in, ending each call with "We love you, even if we worry about you." 3 months before the accident, I made a concerted effort to bridge the growing gap between us. I took on a project renovating a boutique hotel in Connecticut, partly to be closer to home. I invited Dad to tour the site, showing him my designs and explaining my vision. He seemed genuinely impressed. "You've got a good eye, Heather," he admitted. "Maybe different from what I would have chosen for you, but good nonetheless." It was the closest thing to approval I'd received in years. We started having lunch once a week, careful to avoid the topics that usually caused friction. He even introduced me to some of his business associates who might need interior design services. Our last conversation was the Tuesday before the accident. He called to tell me he and Mom were celebrating their 35th wedding anniversary with dinner at their favorite restaurant. "We want you to come home this weekend," he said. "There are some family matters we need to discuss." His tone was serious but not ominous. I assumed they wanted to talk about the upcoming family vacation or perhaps Dad's eventual retirement plans. He had recently turned 65, though he showed no signs of slowing down. "Of course, Dad. I'll be there." "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just some things that need to be said in person." I never found out what those things were. They died on their way home from that anniversary dinner, their car struck by a drunk driver who crossed the center line on a rainy night. The family matters remained unspoken, and I was left wondering what my father had wanted to tell me. Had he finally accepted my career choice? Was he planning to include me in the family business after all? Or was he going to confirm what I had long suspected, that Derek would inherit everything while I would have to continue making my own way? I didn't realize then how cruelly I would get my answer. The call came at 11:42 p.m. I remember checking the clock as my phone lit up with Derek's name, wondering why my brother would be calling so late on a Tuesday. His voice was unrecognizable, choked with emotion as he struggled to form words. "There's been an accident. Mom and Dad, they're at Greenwich Hospital. It's bad, Heather. It's really bad." I don't remember getting dressed or hailing a taxi to Grand Central. I don't remember the late-night train ride from Manhattan to Connecticut, staring out at the darkness, willing the train to move faster. I only remember arriving at the hospital at 1:37 a.m., seeing Derek's face in the waiting room, and knowing immediately from his red-rimmed eyes and hollow expression that they were gone. "They died on impact," he said, his voice flat with shock. "The doctors said they didn't suffer." We collapsed into each other's arms, united in our grief like we hadn't been in years. In that moment, all our differences and competitions fell away. We were just two siblings who had lost the foundation of our world in an instant. The next few days passed in a blur of arrangements and phone calls. Derek, ever the responsible one, took charge of the funeral preparations. I was grateful at first, too numb with grief to handle the details. But as the fog began to lift, I noticed how he consulted with our family attorney, Robert Wilson, on every decision, often behind closed doors. "It's just estate matters," he explained when I questioned him. "We'll sort everything out after the funeral." I accepted this, focusing instead on creating a memorial display of family photographs for the service. Looking through old albums was both comforting and excruciating. There were so many happy memories: family vacations to Cape Cod, Christmas mornings around our giant tree, Dad teaching me to drive in his precious Mercedes, Mom beaming proudly at my high school graduation. It was hard to reconcile those images with the closed caskets we would soon have to face. The funeral was held at the First Presbyterian Church, where we'd attended services every Sunday throughout my childhood. The pews were packed with hundreds of people: business associates, neighbors, friends, even some of my parents' college classmates who had flown in from across the country. My father had been well respected in the community, known for his fair business practices and generous charitable contributions. My mother had served on numerous nonprofit boards and volunteered regularly. Their loss was felt far beyond our immediate family. I stood beside Derek at the front of the church, accepting condolences from an endless line of mourners. Many squeezed my hands and told me how much my father had talked about me. "He was so proud of your creativity," said Mrs. Harrington, my mother's oldest friend. "He kept your design magazine feature framed in his office." This surprised me. Dad had never mentioned displaying my work. It gave me a small measure of comfort to know that perhaps he had been prouder of me than he had let on. Throughout the service, I noticed Robert Wilson, my parents' attorney for over 20 years, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. He was a tall, distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He had always been pleasant but somewhat distant at family gatherings, discussing business with my father and making small talk with me. Today, he seemed to be avoiding my gaze. After the burial service, we hosted a reception at my parents' home. As people mingled in the large living room that my mother had decorated with such care, I overheard a snippet of conversation between Derek and Robert in Dad's study. "When should we tell her?" Robert asked, his voice low but audible through the partially open door. "After everyone leaves," Derek replied. "This isn't the time or place." I assumed they were discussing some aspect of the estate that would be difficult for me to hear in my emotional state. Perhaps Dad had left specific funeral instructions I wasn't aware of, or there were outstanding business matters to address. I didn't press the issue, busy with ensuring our guests had food and keeping myself from falling apart. As evening fell and the last guests departed, I found myself alone in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by remnants of my youth, trophies from swim meets, art projects my mother had framed, photos with friends I'd lost touch with. I picked up the small jewelry box my father had made for my 16th birthday, running my fingers over the smooth cherry wood and the delicate inlay pattern he'd created. Inside was a silver bracelet with a single charm, a fish that reminded us of our Sunday mornings together. I clasped it around my wrist, feeling closer to him. My solitude was interrupted by a knock at the door. Derek stood there, his expression somber. "We need to talk about the will," he said. "Robert wants to meet us at his office tomorrow morning at 9. Can't it wait a few days?" I asked, exhausted by grief and the emotional toll of the funeral. "It's important," Derek insisted. "There are decisions that need to be made quickly regarding the business and the house." I agreed to the meeting, assuming we would both be given our portions of the inheritance and would need to decide how to manage shared assets. Despite our different paths, I had always expected our parents would treat us equally when it came to their estate. We were both their children, after all, and they had always stressed the importance of family. As I tried to sleep that night in my old bed, I kept thinking about the hushed conversation I'd overheard. What was it they didn't want to tell me? A sense of unease crept in, disturbing my already fragile emotional state. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't imagine what it might be. My parents were fair people. They wouldn't do anything to hurt either of their children. How terribly wrong I was. The offices of Wilson and Associates occupied the top floor of a prestigious building in downtown Greenwich. The elevator doors opened to reveal a reception area decorated in rich mahogany and leather, with oil paintings of New England landscapes adorning the walls. It screamed old money and established connections, exactly the image my father had cultivated for his business relationships. Robert's assistant, a young woman with a sympathetic smile, led Derek and me to the conference room where several other family members already waited. My mother's sister, Aunt Martha, sat with her husband Uncle Paul. My father's younger brother, Uncle James, was there with his wife Aunt Susan. Even my cousins Thomas and Emily had come. Their presence surprised me. I hadn't expected such a formal reading with extended family. Robert entered last, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing a solemn expression that made my stomach knot with anxiety. He shook hands with everyone, offering condolences again before taking his seat at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming during this difficult time," he began, his voice carrying the practiced gravity of someone who had delivered bad news many times before. Michael and Eleanor Mitchell were dear friends as well as valued clients, and their loss is felt deeply by all who knew them. He opened his portfolio and removed several documents, arranging them carefully before continuing. "As you know, We're here to discuss the distribution of their estate according to their last will and testament, which was updated and signed 2 months ago on March 15th of this year. 2 months ago? I frowned slightly. Dad hadn't mentioned updating their will recently. I glanced at Derek, who was staring straight ahead, his expression unreadable. Robert cleared his throat and began reading the legal preamble, the formal language washing over me as I braced myself for details of what my parents had left me. Would it be money to expand my design business? Perhaps some of Mom's antique furniture that I had always admired? Or a portion of the family business that I could sell back to Derek since I had no interest in running it? The entirety of the Mitchell estate, including but not limited to the family residence at 247 Maple Avenue, Greenwich, Connecticut, all shares in Mitchell Properties Incorporated, all financial accounts, investments, and retirement funds, all vehicles and personal property not otherwise specified, is hereby bequeathed to Derek Michael Mitchell, to be managed at his sole discretion. The words didn't register at first. I waited for Robert to continue, to read the portion detailing my inheritance. But instead, he looked up from the document and addressed me directly. Heather, your parents left you their personal library of books, your mother's jewelry collection excluding family heirlooms, and the artwork you created that currently hangs in the family home. The room started spinning slightly. Books? My own artwork? Mom's costume jewelry? These weren't assets, they were sentimental items of minimal value. There must be some mistake, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. What about the rest? What about my share of the estate? Robert's expression was carefully professional, but I detected a hint of discomfort as he replied, "There is no mistake, Heather. Your parents were very clear in their instructions. Derek is the sole beneficiary of their financial assets and property." I turned to Derek, expecting him to look shocked, to insist there had been a mistake. Instead, he was examining his fingernails, avoiding eye contact. He had known. This wasn't a surprise to him. Derek? My voice cracked on his name. Did you know about this? He finally met my gaze, his expression a complex mixture of guilt and resolution. Mom and Dad made their decision, Heather. They felt it was for the best. For the best? I repeated, incredulity rising like a tide. How is cutting me out of my inheritance for the best? What did I do to deserve this? It's not about deserving, Derek said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone I'd heard so often. It's about responsibility. The business needs consistent leadership, not to be broken up or sold off in pieces. Dad wanted to ensure his legacy would continue. So give her a fair cash settlement, Aunt Martha interjected, looking as shocked as I felt. Eleanor would never have agreed to leave her daughter with nothing. Mom agreed completely, Derek countered. She understood what was at stake. I stood up so quickly my chair rolled back and hit the wall. What exactly was at stake, Derek? Your control? Your power? What did you say to them to make them do this? Robert intervened, his voice calm but firm. Heather, I understand this is upsetting, but I can assure you the will reflects your parents' wishes as they expressed them to me. They were of sound mind when they signed it. Were they? I challenged, tears threatening. Because the parents I knew would never have done this. They would never have treated their children so unequally. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, needing to escape before I completely broke down in front of everyone. As I reached for the handle, Derek called after me. Heather, wait. We should talk about this. I turned back, seeing the conference room tableau as if from a distance, my relative's shocked expressions, Robert's professional mask, and Derek, standing now, one hand extended toward me as if he could pull me back from the edge I was teetering on. There's nothing to talk about, I said, my voice eerily calm despite the storm inside me. You got everything and I got nothing. Message received loud and clear. I walked out, past the surprised receptionist, into the elevator, and finally out onto the street where the spring sunshine seemed to mock my darkness. Only when I reached my car did I allow the tears to come, great heaving sobs that shook my entire body. My phone buzzed repeatedly with calls from Derek and Aunt Martha, but I ignored them all. I couldn't bear to hear explanations or platitudes. The two people I had trusted most in the world, my parents, had delivered the ultimate rejection from beyond the grave. And my brother, my only remaining immediate family, had somehow engineered it all. As I finally managed to start my car with trembling hands, one thought crystallized through the fog of betrayal and grief: this wasn't over. Something wasn't right about this situation, and I wouldn't rest until I discovered the truth. For 3 days after the will reading, I barely left my hotel room. I couldn't face returning to New York and my design business as if nothing had happened. I couldn't bear to see Derek or enter our family home that now belonged solely to him. I existed in a haze of room service, mindless television, and sporadic crying jags that left me exhausted. On the 4th day, my phone rang with a call from an unexpected source: Rachel Dawson, my best friend from high school who had become a financial advisor. We had drifted apart over the years but had reconnected at the funeral. I almost didn't answer, but something compelled me to pick up. "Heather, I've been worried sick about you," she said without preamble. "No one's heard from you since the will reading. Are you okay?" "I've been better," I replied, my voice hoarse from disuse. "Listen, what happened to you was wrong," Rachel said firmly. "And I don't buy for 1 second that your parents intended this outcome. You need to fight it." "How?" I asked, defeat evident in my tone. "The will was clear. They left everything to Derek." "Wills can be contested, especially when there are suspicious circumstances," she said. "My firm works with a great attorney who specializes in estate disputes. His name is Samuel Green. Will you at least talk to him?" I agreed, more to appease Rachel than out of any real hope. But the meeting with Samuel Green the next morning marked the beginning of my transformation from grieving, passive daughter to determined investigator of my own family's secrets. Samuel's office was nothing like Robert Wilson's mahogany shrine to old money. It was modern, bright, and located in a renovated factory building. Samuel himself was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with keen eyes that missed nothing and a straightforward manner I appreciated. "Based on what you've told me, there are several potential grounds for contesting this will," he said after listening to my story. "Undue influence is the most likely angle. If your brother pressured your parents while they were vulnerable, we might have a case." "What would constitute vulnerability?" I asked. "Illness, cognitive decline, emotional distress. Anything that might have made them more susceptible to manipulation," he explained. "When did you say they updated their will?" 2 months before they died?" I nodded, and he made a note. "We need to establish what was happening in their lives during that period. Was your father in good health? Any signs of memory issues or unusual behavior?" I thought back, trying to remember any details from our weekly lunches. He seemed more tired than usual. He mentioned having trouble sleeping, but he attributed it to stress about some problem property they were developing. "It's a start," Samuel said. "I'll need you to be my detective, Heather. Gather every piece of evidence you can find: bank statements, emails, medical records, anything that might show your parents' state of mind or any unusual activity preceding the will change." Thus began my investigation. I started with the easiest source: family friends and my parents' acquaintances who had no reason to lie to me. I called my mother's friend Mrs. Harrington first. "Your father had been having dizzy spells," she revealed, sounding surprised I didn't know. "Eleanor was worried sick about him, but he refused to slow down. Typical Michael, pushing himself too hard." This was news to me. Dad had never mentioned any health problems during our lunches. I asked if she knew when these dizzy spells had started. "Sometime in January, I believe. Eleanor mentioned they were going to the Mayo Clinic for tests in February." "Very hush-hush, you know how private your parents could be about such matters." Another piece of the puzzle. The will had been changed in March, shortly after this apparent medical consultation. Had my father received a concerning diagnosis he hadn't shared with me? My next step was bolder. While Derek was at the office, I used my old key to enter our family home. I felt like an intruder in the place I'd grown up, tiptoeing through rooms filled with memories, searching for clues. In my father's study, I found his journal in the secret compartment of his desk that he thought no one knew about. I had discovered it years ago while looking for Christmas presents. With shaking hands, I opened it to entries from early this year. January 15th, dizzy spell in meeting today. Embarrassing and concerning. E insisting on doctor appointment. February 3rd, tests inconclusive. Doctor recommending Mayo for more specialized evaluation. Not telling kids yet. No need to worry them. February 20th, Mayo results troubling. Early signs of vascular dementia possible. Need to get affairs in order while still thinking clearly. Meeting with Robert next week. March 10th, difficult conversation with D about succession plan. Not what I expected. Pressure to change arrangements. E disagrees strongly. March 15th, signed new will today. Not comfortable with all aspects but D made compelling arguments. Must protect company legacy. Will explain to H when time is right. E reluctantly agreed after much discussion. My hands trembled as I read these words in my father's distinctive handwriting. Vascular dementia. A succession plan. My father had been ill, his judgment potentially compromised, and Derek had known. The timing of the will change suddenly made terrible sense. Before leaving, I photographed the journal entries and continued searching. In the bottom drawer of the desk, I found a folder labeled Original Estate Plan containing documents from last year, a previous will draft that divided the estate equally between Derek and me, with provisions for Derek to buy my shares in the business if I wasn't interested in running it. This was the smoking gun proof that my parents had originally intended an equitable distribution before my father's illness and Derek's compelling arguments. My investigation continued with a visit to Jenkins, my father's longtime accountant. I approached him under the pretext of needing help understanding some tax implications of my inheritance. I was surprised to hear about the changes to your father's will, he admitted after some careful questioning. It didn't align with our previous discussions about his estate planning. When I pressed for details, Jenkins looked uncomfortable but continued, there were some concerning transactions in the company accounts earlier this year. Large withdrawals that Michael couldn't fully explain when I questioned him. He said Derek was handling a special project, but the documentation was irregular. What kind of amounts are we talking about? I asked. Nearly $500,000 over 3 months, he replied, shocking me. I was planning to dig deeper, but then the accident happened. I thanked Jenkins and left with more questions than answers. What had Derek done with that money? Was the company in financial trouble that I didn't know about? My next stop was Martin Crawford, my father's assistant for over 15 years. Initially reluctant to speak with me, he eventually opened up over coffee at a cafe far from the office. Your brother has been making strange decisions since taking over, Martin confided. Canceling projects your father was passionate about, bringing in consultants your father had explicitly rejected. When I asked about the months before my parents' death, Martin's expression darkened. There were arguments. Loud ones, behind closed doors. I overheard your brother telling your father that he was making irrational decisions, that he needed to face reality about his health. Did you ever hear my name mentioned in these arguments? I asked. Martin nodded slowly. Once. Your father said, Heather deserves her fair share, regardless of her career choices. Your brother replied that you would run the company into the ground if you had any control. Each revelation was another blow, but also another piece of evidence. I returned to my hotel room each night to compile my findings into a timeline, working with Samuel to build our case. The final breakthrough came when I visited my father's doctor, Dr. Phillips, presenting myself as executing my portion of the estate. The sympathetic nurse provided copies of his medical records, which confirmed the vascular dementia diagnosis and noted potential impairment in judgment and decision-making as early as February. Most damning of all was my discovery in my mother's personal email account, which I accessed using the password she'd always used, my birthday combined with her favorite ballet. There, I found a draft email addressed to me, never sent, dated just 3 days before the accident. Heather. Your father and I need to speak with you this weekend about important family matters. I cannot say more in writing, but please know that recent decisions have been made under difficult circumstances. Your father is not well, though he refuses to acknowledge the extent of it. Derek has taken advantage of this situation in ways that deeply trouble me. We need to make things right before it's too late. All my love. Mom. I stared at the screen, tears streaming down my face. My mother had known something was wrong. She had wanted to fix it. And then they had died before they could. After 6 weeks of investigation, I had enough evidence to challenge the will. With medical records showing my father's cognitive impairment, financial documents revealing suspicious transactions, witness statements about Derek's pressure tactics, and the journal entries and email draft demonstrating my parents' true intentions, we were ready for a confrontation. I called Derek and arranged to meet him at the family home. It was time for the truth to come out. The house looked exactly as it always had, meticulously maintained, with my mother's prized roses blooming along the front walkway. As I pulled into the circular driveway, memories flooded back, riding my bike as a child, Dad teaching me to parallel park, Mom waving from the porch as I left for college. This had been my home too, and now I was a visitor, an outsider. Derek opened the door before I could ring the bell. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes and a tightness around his mouth that I hadn't noticed at the funeral. Heather, he said, his tone cautious. I'm glad you came. We need to talk. Yes, we do, I replied, walking past him into the grand foyer with its sweeping staircase. He led me to our father's study, the room where I had found the journal just weeks earlier. Nothing had been changed. Dad's reading glasses still sat on the desk as if he might return at any moment to use them. Can I get you something to drink? Derek offered, gesturing to the bar cart in the corner. No. This isn't a social call. He sighed and sat in one of the leather armchairs, motioning for me to take the other. I know you're upset about the will. Upset? I interrupted, struggling to keep my voice level. Derek, you manipulated our dying father into cutting me out of my inheritance. Upset doesn't begin to cover it. His expression hardened. You don't know what you're talking about. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder containing copies of everything I had discovered, the journal entries, medical records, financial statements, and witness testimonies. I placed it on the coffee table between us. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Dad was diagnosed with vascular dementia in February. You used his fear and confusion to convince him to change his will in March. Mom opposed it but eventually gave in, probably to keep peace. And 3 days before they died, she was planning to tell me everything. Derek's face paled as he flipped through the documents. You've been snooping through private records? Breaking into emails? That's illegal. So is exerting undue influence on someone with diminished capacity, I countered. So is embezzling company funds. What did you do with the $500,000 you withdrew, Derek? Gambling debts again? His head snapped up at that, shock evident in his expression. How did you? Jenkins noticed the irregular transactions. Martin overheard arguments. People talk, Derek. Especially when they're concerned about suspicious behavior. Derek's demeanor changed then, from defensive to calculating. He closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, studying me with new respect. You've been busy, he said. I underestimated you. You've been underestimating me our entire lives, I replied evenly. He was quiet for a moment, then sighed deeply. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. They weren't supposed to die. Tell me what happened, I demanded. All of it. I deserve the truth. Derek stood and walked to the window, staring out at the garden our mother had lovingly tended. When he spoke, his voice was different, stripped of its usual confidence. The company was in trouble. Had been for months. Dad's decision-making was becoming erratic, investments were failing, but he refused to acknowledge there was a problem. I tried to talk to him about it, but he kept saying everything was under control. What kind of trouble? I pressed. Financial. We overextended on the Riverside project. Construction costs skyrocketed, permits were delayed, and investors were getting nervous. I needed to cover the shortfalls to keep the project from collapsing completely. That's what the withdrawals were for. Why didn't you tell me? I could have helped. He laughed bitterly. How? With your design business that barely breaks even? This required millions, Heather, not color schemes and furniture arrangements. His dismissive tone stung, but I pushed past it. So you decided the solution was to take everything for yourself? I decided the solution was to save the company Dad spent his life building. Derek snapped, turning to face me. If the estate had been divided, half the assets would have gone to you. You would have sold your shares, broken up the company to fund your little design dreams. Everything Dad built would have been dismantled. You don't know that, I argued. I would never have destroyed Dad's legacy. No? You've spent your entire adult life rejecting everything our parents valued: security, tradition, responsibility. You chose pretty pictures over practical business every time. His words revealed the resentment he had harbored all these years, hidden beneath brotherly tolerance. This wasn't just about money, it was about our fundamentally different approaches to life. So you manipulated Dad when he was vulnerable, I said. You convinced him I couldn't be trusted with my own inheritance. Derek's expression hardened. I protected the company. Yes, I pressured him. Yes, I took advantage of his condition to get what needed to be done. But I did it to preserve what he spent 40 years building. And Mom? She just went along with this? At this, Derek had the decency to look ashamed. No. She fought me on it. Said it was wrong, that you deserved your share regardless of what you might do with it. But Dad, he was scared, Heather. The diagnosis terrified him. He became fixated on leaving a unified legacy, and I used that. The admission hung in the air between us. I felt sick imagining my father, confused and frightened by his deteriorating mind, being manipulated by the son he trusted. The dinner they were coming from when they had the accident, I said slowly as realization dawned. That was their anniversary dinner, but it wasn't just a celebration, was it? That's why they wanted to see me that weekend. Mom was going to tell me everything. Derek nodded, unable to meet my eyes. She insisted that we come clean, that we revise the will again to be fair to you. Dad agreed. He was having a moment of clarity, I think. They were planning to meet with Robert the following Monday. The cruelty of the timing hit me anew. If they had lived just a few more days, everything would have been different. I filed a legal challenge to the will, I told him, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. With the evidence I've gathered, I'll win, Derek. The court will invalidate the March will and revert to the previous version. You would drag our family through a public legal battle? He asked incredulously. You forced my hand when you stole my inheritance, I replied. This isn't what Mom and Dad wanted, and you know it. I stood up and reached for the folder, but Derek grabbed my wrist, his grip tight enough to hurt. Don't do this, Heather. Please. The company won't survive the scandal. Everything Dad worked for will be destroyed. I jerked my arm free. You should have thought of that before you betrayed me. Before you betrayed them. As I turned to leave, Derek called after me, his voice desperate now. If you go through with this, I'll fight you every step of the way. I'll make sure everyone knows how you abandoned the family business, how you were never interested in Dad's legacy until there was money to be had. I paused at the doorway, looking back at my brother, this stranger who shared my blood but apparently none of my values. Threaten me all you want, Derek. Unlike you, I have nothing left to lose. As I walked out of my childhood home, I felt oddly unburdened. The truth, painful as it was, had been dragged into the light. My parents hadn't rejected me after all, they had been victims of manipulation and tragic timing. The fight ahead would be difficult, but for the first time since standing in Robert Wilson's office, I felt a glimmer of hope. The battle for justice had just begun. The legal process began with a formal challenge to the will filed in probate court. Samuel Green prepared meticulous documentation outlining our case, medical evidence of my father's cognitive impairment, financial records showing Derek's suspicious transactions, statements from witnesses regarding the arguments and pressure, and most importantly, my father's journal entries and my mother's draft email. Derek, as expected, hired the most expensive attorneys in Connecticut to fight us. Robert Wilson, seeming uncomfortable with the entire situation, recused himself from representing either side, claiming conflict of interest. I couldn't help wondering how much he had known about my father's condition when overseeing the will change. The initial hearing was set for September, 4 months after my parents' deaths. In the meantime, Derek maintained control of all assets as the named executor. I had to take out a loan against my small design business to cover legal fees, putting everything I had worked for at risk. "You don't have to do this," Rachel told me over dinner one evening, concerned about the toll the fight was taking. "Your parents would hate seeing you and Derek tear each other apart." "My parents would hate knowing their son manipulated my father's illness to disinherit me," I replied. "This isn't just about money, Rachel. It's about right and wrong." As the legal battle intensified, so did the emotional strain. I threw myself into work, taking on more design projects than I could comfortably handle to distract myself and generate income for the mounting legal expenses. I barely slept, surviving on coffee and determination. Derek, meanwhile, launched a whisper campaign among family friends and business associates, suggesting I was a money-hungry daughter who had abandoned the family business only to come crawling back when there was an inheritance to claim. Some people who had known me my entire life began to look at me differently, questioning my motives. The lowest point came when Derek's attorneys submitted a motion to dismiss our case, arguing that I was merely upset about being left out of the will and had manufactured evidence of undue influence. The judge denied their motion based on the medical records, but the accusation that I was fabricating evidence cut deeply. I called Samuel that evening, fighting back tears. "Maybe I should just drop it. Take whatever settlement they offer and move on with my life." "That's exactly what they want you to think," he replied firmly. "They're trying to wear you down. But we have solid evidence, Heather. Don't give up when we're this close to discovery." Discovery was the formal process of evidence exchange, and it proved to be a turning point. Derek's attorneys were forced to hand over internal company documents that revealed even more troubling financial decisions than I had originally uncovered. Not only had Derek used company funds to cover personal gambling debts, but he had also been hiding the company's true financial state from my father for over a year. The most significant breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Martha, my mother's sister, called me one evening in October. "I found something while cleaning out my guest room closet," she said, her voice tense with excitement. "A letter from your mother. She must have mailed it the day before the accident, but with all the chaos after their deaths, I never opened it. I rushed to her house that night. The letter was still in its envelope, postmarked the day before my parents died. With trembling hands, I opened it and began to read my mother's elegant handwriting. "Dearest Martha, I'm writing this in case something happens before Michael and I can set things right. I pray that won't be necessary, but recent events have left me uneasy and seeking insurance. Derek has convinced Michael to change his will in a way that entirely excludes Heather from her rightful inheritance. He took advantage of Michael's medical condition and fears to manipulate him. I initially opposed this vehemently but ultimately agreed only to keep peace and because Derek promised it was temporary, just until the company stabilized. I now believe Derek never intended for this arrangement to be temporary. The changes to the will are deeply unfair to Heather and do not reflect our true wishes for our children. We're meeting with Heather this weekend to explain everything, and with Robert on Monday to revise the will properly. If for any reason we're unable to do so, please share this letter with Heather and support her in challenging the March 15th will. The enclosed medical reports and notes from Michael's doctor should help establish his vulnerable state when the changes were made. I'm so sorry to burden you with this, but I need to ensure justice for my daughter if anything prevents us from doing it ourselves. All my love. Eleanor. Attached were copies of my father's medical reports and a handwritten note from his doctor expressing concerns about his decision-making capacity. It was the validation I had been seeking, clear proof of my mother's opposition to the will and her determination to correct it. Samuel filed the letter and attachments with the court immediately. Within days, Derek's attorneys contacted us about settlement discussions. They know they're going to lose if this goes to trial, Samuel explained. Your mother's letter is devastating to their case. The mediation session was tense. Derek sat across from me, flanked by his attorneys, looking simultaneously defiant and defeated. The mediator, a retired judge, reviewed our evidence and Derek's counterarguments before making her recommendation. Based on the substantial evidence of undue influence and diminished capacity, it is my opinion that the court would likely invalidate the March 15 will, she stated. I recommend returning to the terms of the previous will dated June 10 of last year, which provided for equal distribution between the siblings. Derek's attorney leaned over to whisper in his ear. After a moment, Derek nodded reluctantly. We'll agree to the invalidation of the March will, his attorney announced, but we request that Ms. Mitchell sell her shares in Mitchell Properties back to her brother at fair market value, to maintain continuity in the business operations. It was a reasonable request, and one I had anticipated. I had no desire to be involved in running the company, especially not alongside Derek. I'll agree to that, I said, provided the valuation is conducted by an independent third party, and that I receive my full half of all other assets immediately. The agreement was drafted, and after another round of negotiations on smaller details, we signed. The battle that had consumed 6 months of my life was finally over. As we prepared to leave, Derek approached me in the hallway outside the conference room. You got what you wanted, he said, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. Are you happy now? I studied my brother, seeing not the confident, successful man he projected to the world, but someone broken by his own poor choices. This was never about winning, Derek, I replied quietly. It was about justice. About honoring what Mom and Dad really wanted for both of us. And what about the company, he demanded. Do you have any idea how hard it will be to buy you out without destabilizing everything? You should have thought about that before you tried to take everything for yourself, I said. But I'm not interested in revenge. The payment can be structured over 5 years if that helps with cash flow. I don't want to destroy Dad's legacy either. Surprise flickered across his face at this concession. For a moment, I glimpsed the brother I had grown up with, not the adversary of recent months. Why would you do that? He asked suspiciously. Because despite everything, we're still family, I answered. The only family each other has left. Mom and Dad would want us to find a way forward, eventually. Derek didn't respond, but as he turned to leave, his shoulders seemed a little less burdened. We had a long way to go before any real healing could begin, but perhaps this was a first small step. The legal victory brought financial security but couldn't erase the emotional scars of the past months. I found myself alternately elated at the vindication and deeply sad about the broken relationship with my brother and the painful truth about his actions. Therapy helped, as did throwing myself into rebuilding my design business with the resources I now had available. 3 months after the settlement, I received an unexpected call from Thomas Reed, one of my father's oldest friends and business partners. I've been following what happened, he said. It was wrong, what Derek did. Your father would be proud of how you stood up for yourself. Thank you, I replied, touched by his support. That means a lot. I have a proposition for you, Thomas continued. Your father and I were developing plans for a boutique hotel chain that would combine luxury amenities with sustainable design. He was particularly excited about your potential contribution to the aesthetic vision. Would you be interested in reviving the project? It was the perfect opportunity to honor my father's legacy while utilizing my design skills. With my inheritance secured, I had the capital to become a true partner in the venture rather than just a hired designer. I'd be honored, I told him. When can we meet to discuss it? As the months passed and the hotel project took shape, I found unexpected healing in continuing my father's work in my own way. Derek and I maintained a distant but civil relationship, professionally cooperating on matters related to the transition of my assets but rarely discussing personal matters. The family business continued under Derek's leadership, though the independent audit required by our settlement had revealed further financial issues that needed addressing. As promised, I didn't interfere with his management decisions, but I did insist on transparency and regular reporting as a condition of the extended payment arrangement for my shares. On the anniversary of my parents' death, I visited their graves alone, bringing my mother's favorite white roses and my father's preferred scotch, pouring a small amount into the ground beside the headstone. "I wish you could have set things right yourselves," I told them quietly. "But I think you'd be proud that I found the strength to do it. I miss you both, every day." As I sat there in the peaceful cemetery, I felt a sense of closure that had eluded me for the past year. The pain wasn't gone, but it had transformed into something more manageable, a scar rather than an open wound. I had fought for justice and won, but more importantly, I had discovered my own resilience in the process. The truth had cost me my relationship with my brother, at least for now, but it had given me back my belief in my parents' love. They hadn't rejected me after all. In their final days, they had tried to make things right. That knowledge was worth all the struggle it had taken to uncover it. The 2 years following the settlement brought unexpected changes and growth. With my inheritance secured, I expanded my interior design business into a full-service firm with 10 employees. Our reputation for innovative, sustainable luxury design grew rapidly, particularly after the successful launch of the first boutique hotel in Thomas Reed's chain, which received glowing reviews in Architectural Digest and Travel Plus Leisure. The financial security allowed me to be selective about projects, choosing only those that aligned with my vision and values. I no longer needed to take on work just to pay the bills, and this freedom translated into more creative and fulfilling designs. My company, which I renamed Mitchell Design Group in honor of my parents, became known for thoughtful spaces that combined beauty with purpose. Derek and I maintained our careful distance during this time, communicating primarily through attorneys regarding business matters. He struggled with the company initially after the settlement, forced to address the financial issues that the audit had uncovered and to make significant changes to management practices. There were rumors of his continued gambling, though I tried not to pay attention to the gossip. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in April, Derek appeared unexpectedly at my office. My assistant asked if I wanted to send him away, but curiosity won out over caution. He looked different, thinner, more subdued, with a humility in his posture that I'd never seen before. He declined coffee and sat awkwardly on the edge of the chair across from my desk. "The company's stable again," he said after a moment of uncomfortable silence. "I've made the 3rd payment for your shares ahead of schedule. The wire transfer should be in your account by tomorrow." "Thank you for letting me know," I replied, wondering why he had come in person for such a routine matter. Derek fidgeted with his watch, clearly building up to something. Finally, he looked up, meeting my eyes directly for the first time since entering. "I've been in recovery for 8 months, he said. "Gambling addiction. Part of the process is making amends to people I've harmed." The admission caught me off guard. "I didn't know you were in treatment." "It's not something I've advertised," he said with a faint smile. "But after everything fell apart, after the settlement and the company nearly collapsing, I finally had to face the truth about myself. The gambling was destroying everything, and I was too proud to admit I needed help." "I'm glad you got help," I said cautiously. "I came to tell you that you were right," Derek continued, his voice steady but quiet. "About everything. I manipulated Dad when he was vulnerable. I took advantage of his illness and his trust in me. I convinced myself I was protecting the company, but the truth is, I was protecting myself. My position, my control, my ability to cover my gambling losses without anyone knowing." The confession hung in the air between us, the truth we both had known but had never acknowledged so directly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he added quickly. "I don't deserve that. But I wanted you to know that I understand what I did, and I'm truly sorry for the pain I caused you." I studied my brother's face, seeing genuine remorse there. The anger I had carried for so long had gradually faded during the past 2 years, replaced by a dull sadness for what might have been if he had made different choices. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally. "That couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," he admitted. "But it's necessary. For my recovery and because you deserve to hear it." We talked for nearly an hour after that, cautiously at first, then with increasing openness. Derek spoke about his treatment program and the underlying issues that had fueled his addiction. I shared details about my design work and the hotel project that had been so meaningful to me. "Dad would have loved what you're doing with the hotels," Derek said, a hint of our old connection flickering between us. "He always said you had an eye for potential that no one else could see." "He did?" This was news to me. Derek nodded. "All the time. He kept a portfolio of your projects in his desk drawer. Used to show them to clients sometimes, bragging about his talented daughter." The revelation brought tears to my eyes. Dad had been prouder of me than he'd let on, even while pushing me toward business instead of design. As Derek prepared to leave, he hesitated by the door. "There's one more thing. I found Mom's jewelry box in the attic while cleaning out some things. The real jewelry, not just the costume pieces mentioned in the will. I thought you should have it. It's in my car if you want it now." The box contained not just my mother's precious jewelry but also old photographs, letters, and keepsakes I hadn't seen before. Among them was a small velvet pouch containing my parents' wedding rings. "Mom always said these should go to you when the time came," Derek explained quietly. "She thought you had the best chance of a marriage as happy as theirs." This unexpected gesture of goodwill marked a turning point in our fragile reconciliation. While we would never recapture the easy relationship of our childhood, we began to build something new, a more honest, adult connection based on who we actually were rather than who our parents had wanted us to be. That fall, I established the Mitchell Family Foundation in our parents' names, dedicating it to funding arts education for underprivileged children and providing resources for families affected by dementia. Derek surprised me by making a substantial donation and joining the advisory board. Working together on the foundation gave us a neutral ground where we could interact without the baggage of our past conflict. We disagreed sometimes on direction and priorities, but we learned to communicate more openly and to respect each other's perspectives. The first Thanksgiving after Derek's apology, I invited him to dinner at my apartment instead of both of us spending the holiday alone. The conversation was sometimes stilted, occasionally veering into uncomfortable territory, but we managed to share memories of happier family gatherings without the bitterness that had previously tainted them. As we finished our pumpkin pie, Derek raised his glass in a toast. "To Mom and Dad. They weren't perfect, but they did their best." "To Mom and Dad," I echoed, clinking my glass against his. Later that weekend, I drove out to my parents' favorite spot, a scenic overlook by the lake where we'd often gone for family picnics. I sat on the wooden bench where my father and I had sometimes talked after fishing, watching the sunlight dance across the water. For so long, I had been consumed by the fight for justice, for my rightful inheritance. The battle had been necessary not just for the financial security it provided, but for the truth it uncovered. My parents hadn't rejected me after all. They had loved me in their imperfect way, even when they didn't understand or approve of my choices. The inheritance that truly mattered wasn't the money or property. It was the resilience I had discovered in myself, the determination to stand up for what was right even when it would have been easier to give in. It was the compassion to offer my brother a path to redemption despite his betrayal. It was the creativity and vision that connected me to my father in ways I hadn't fully appreciated until after he was gone. As I sat by the lake, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me since that day in Robert Wilson's office. The journey had been painful, but it had led me to a stronger, wiser version of myself. I had honored my parents' true wishes not just by claiming my rightful inheritance, but by becoming someone who could use it wisely and well. The sun began to set over the water, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. It was time to go home, to continue building the life and legacy that was uniquely mine. Life doesn't always give us what we expect or believe we deserve. Sometimes it gives us painful challenges instead of easy blessings. But if my experience had taught me anything, it was that fighting for truth is always worthwhile, even when the battle seems impossible to win. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when it seemed like everyone was against you? What gave you the strength to keep going? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more stories of resilience and redemption. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't what's written in a will, but what you discover about yourself along the way.